Well, here we are at Harlem Art Space with Amanda Graham, jeweller. Thank you for inviting us here, Amanda.
You're very welcome. Nice to meet you.
Good. I just thought we'd start by exploring your history, really, how you came to be a jeweller.
I think it started when I was quite young at school, actually. We did this thing called craft design and technology in year 9 before we chose our GCSE options. And one of the things we could do was metalwork. And I absolutely loved it. Just the fact that, we were given things that we could hit with hammers, we could saw. I mean, we wouldn't be allowed to do any of that now. It would completely be banned. But back then, we were just given, a piece of brass and told to go and, saw it into a shoehorn shape and bash it so that it's kind of shoehorn shaped and then polish it. So you've got a polished shoehorn. I mean, I never quite understood what the point of a shoehorn was when I was 14, but nevertheless, the fact that, you start off with this flat bit of metal and you've actually made something out of it was quite amazing to me. When we had to choose our options, craft design and technology clashed with chemistry. And chemistry was about the only academic subject that I was any good at. Everything else at school I completely failed at. The school system just did not work for me, apart from chemistry. And I think I liked chemistry because, again, it was transformations. You could start with something and end with something else. I ended up doing a chemistry degree, not really by choice. It was more because my dad really wanted me to do it. My dad was a difficult man to live with. He was born able-bodied, but when I was very young, there was he had an accident involving an explosion where he worked. So he ended up with severe burns, which affected his face, his legs and his hands. So he ended up in hospital for a very long time, having skin grafts. And he refused to sign anything that was going to allow me to do a fine art degree or a fine art foundation course or anything to do with art. I got a grant from ICI, which was the company that blew my dad up, and they gave sons and daughters of the workers at ICI a grant for books. So I didn't spend my grant on books. I spent it on a silversmithing course at Castle College in Sheffield, which they didn't give us any silver to work with, it was all copper. Right. But nevertheless, I did that for 2 years alongside my degree. And then with my degree, I went and worked in Botswana for a while, teaching science. And while I was there, I did a lot of voluntary work for AIDS charities, because in Botswana AIDS was absolutely endemic. 40% of the population at any given time they estimated had HIV, but that wasn't with accurate testing, so it was probably a lot more than that. And the students that I taught in my classes, a lot of them had HIV and were very poorly people. And when I came back to the UK, I decided that I didn't want to be a teacher, even though I'd been teaching science. I wanted to be a burns care nurse. During this time, I was still making little bits of jewellery, but the nursing was all consuming, so I didn't have an awful lot of time to do anything really, apart from look after my daughter and go to work. But then I met my now husband, and we moved in with him, and he had space for me to set up a workbench. So from that point onwards, I was able to carry on with my jeweling, and also I stopped nursing and I did a PhD. So I did a PhD in chemistry. So during the PhD, I had the time then to make jewellery, and from that point onwards, I've just carried on.
What a fascinating life. Several of the artists I've interviewed have histories like this, where they were often prevented when they were young from doing that art, but there's just something that has to be expressed, and it's just like waiting and bubbling away inside them, and then when they get the opportunity, they always take it and always grow into their art later on in life. So it's wonderful to hear that you've been able to do that.
The nicest part for me is, when you've got everything together and you're polishing it and it's finished, that's kind of, the nicest part. Or if you're setting a stone and the setting's working well and you've gone through all the jeopardy moments of melting the whole lot, and you've actually got to the point where you've got, 15 solder joints and you haven't melted any of them.
Right.
So, it's kind of like phew, but yeah.
Shall we talk about some of your work in more detail and some of the techniques you use?
Yeah, so I can show you an example here of something called fold forming. This is a pair of earrings that I've made for a friend, and they are loosely based on leaves, a leaf motif. So fold forming is exactly what it sounds like, really. So these started off as flat pieces of metal that were rectangular, that I folded in half, and I made a very defined crease using a hammer, so that we kind of got a vein down the centre of the leaf. And then I cut it so that it was leaf shaped, and then I hammered it, then it just looks like the veins of a leaf. So it looks a bit like a banana leaf, I think. Banana plant leaf. So this is a bit of sterling silver. It's rectangular silver wire that I want to turn into ring bands, but it's really, really stiff. So if I want to wrap that around a ring mandrel, I'm going to struggle. So the way to make it malleable and workable is to do something called anneal it. So that involves disrupting this crystal lattice so that you get disorder. The disordered structure is bendy. So the way to do that is to provide energy in the form of heat to the silver, and you basically heat it until it glows red. So I don't want to melt it, I just want to anneal it. And you can see actually it's starting to change colour. It's going black because of the copper that's coming to the surface, and copper reacts with air straight away to form copper oxide, and that's black. Right, that should be enough. The temptation now is to pick it up, but no, I'm not going to do that, so we're just going to grab it here and stick it in water to cool it down, and that's called quenching, because that just quenches it, and it means that you can then handle it, obviously. So now, see how bendy that's become?
Oh wow!
You can just bend it like it's a piece of plastic. One technique that I use a lot is called reticulation. It's where you raise a layer of fine silver to the surface of metal, and it creates a surface texture that looks like a sort of boiled surface. So to start off doing that, you have to get rid of the copper content of sterling silver. So you heat it so that you get a black layer of copper on the surface, and then you take it off with acid, and you do that several times until you get a layer of fine silver on the top, like that.
Mm.
So silver is actually white. It's only silver coloured, like this one, when it's been polished. So that's quite extreme reticulation, so you can see that it's really creased the surface. Generally, I just leave it slightly distorted to give a more subtle effect. The reason for that is that if you were to completely reticulate to that extent, it weakens the silver, so that if you then try and bend it, you're likely just to snap it. So what I'll do with that is put it in acid to take off the oxide, and then I will etch it using acid, so I get a further texture over the top of it. So this is an oxidised, acid etched, reticulated cuff with a little stone set in to the centre of it. It was heated to bring the copper in the sterling silver to the surface. That was taken off with acid. That was done 10 times, so that eventually the copper had pretty well gone from the surface of the sterling silver, and what was left on the top was a deposit of fine silver with no copper in it. And then I've acid etched through the reticulated surface. It's only at this point that I turn it into a cuff shape. So it's been acid etched, and then it's put on a mandrel and turned into a cuff, and I've just set a little stone in this. And the reason it's black is because it's been treated with an oxidising solution, which is it smells of rotten eggs. It's not a nice smell. I do have to warn people in the studios if I'm using it, because I think there's something wrong with the drains. It's not the drains, it's me. I quite like this. A lot of my work is oxidised.
I can't believe just how much science there is in the jewellery. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think there's as much science as you want to apply to it. I just approach everything from that perspective anyway. But yeah, a lot of what I make has been subjected to a fair amount of chemistry, I think.
Where do you find the inspiration for your work?
Two main things, really. One is mental health and neurodiversity, and my work is very much comes from that perspective. And the other is my local environment, which is quarry. Well, I live next to a quarry, basically a working quarry. So I make series of jewellery based on mental health themes. So in 2021, I think it was during the first lockdown, I made a series of brooches that I called the series I'm Fine. And the brooches represented what people would say to you, even though they were lonely, they were suffering from all of the trauma of COVID, losing people, and it was a kind of coping mechanism just to automatically say I'm fine, when actually, you know, you could understand that they would be anything but fine. So I was thinking about a kind of physical representation of this as a metaphor, and I was reminded of fossil hunting on the beaches of Whitby in a place called Port Mulgrave. And I remember when fossil hunting, looking into rock pools and pulling up the stones and seeing what was underneath those stones, and there was a whole world of, you know, little urchins, things would scuttle away, little crabs. So what goes on underneath these stones you can't see unless you actually lift the stone up. And I was thinking that that's similar really to what happens when you ask somebody if they're fine, and they're not fine. There's all sorts going on underneath. I think people like to appear to cope, because to not appear to cope shows vulnerability, and we're all vulnerable. So, you know, it's I think it's kind of a common theme regardless of COVID or any other trauma that's going on in life. So another series that I made is wishing buckets. So this is a wishing bucket. It's a pendant. It has space inside for a little scroll of paper which fits in there, and you can write whatever you want on this little bit of paper if you're going to give this as a gift, or you know, if you're going to keep it, whatever you want to write on this bit of paper will fit into there. So the idea for wishing buckets came about from a perspective of neurodiversity, really, and the reason I failed at every single academic subject at school apart from chemistry was because I just couldn't pay attention. I just would drift off. I'd get chucked out of maths continuously for not paying attention. I was told, you're never going to go to university, you're stupid. So I left school just basically being labelled as stupid. So, you know, you carry all these comments around with you, and at some point you just have to let it go when you've realised that you've proved to yourself, everybody else, that you're not stupid. What do you do with all these comments? And you know, the best way for me to cope with it is just to put them somewhere. Don't think about them. They're all irrelevant now. So I was thinking about, you know, putting things into a bucket, putting the lid on the bucket, and just, that's it. No more thoughts about what people might think of you. The other theme that I did recently was I made a series of spoons, and the spoons were based on spoon theory, which is a metaphor for how people with neurodiversities cope with everyday life. And I think it applies to any disability, really, not just neurodiversity. And it's kind of, if you think about having a full set of spoons at the start of the day, if you aren't struggling with neurodiversity or any sort of disability, the challenges that come along to you during the day don't really deplete your spoons too much. So you'll start with a set of spoons and you'll end with a set of spoons. However, if you're faced with challenges due to disability for whatever reason, your spoons get depleted more quickly. So any challenges will emotionally deplete you or physically deplete you far quicker. So you end up with less spoons than an able-bodied or an able person would have.
So how much of your work is commission work, and how much do you just do your own designs and play with designs and develop new ideas?
Most of it's my own work, yeah. Even if I get a commission, I'm usually just given free rein to do what they want me to do, really, although I always try and engage as much as possible with people to make sure that they're not going to be unpleasantly surprised when they get something that is not what they expected. So, at the moment, the commission I'm working on, we've talked through all stages of that, so she knows what she's going to get at the end of it.
So how do people first contact you if they're interested in a commission?
Usually it's email, actually. Or I'll get a text, or they've probably seen me at an event or something, or they've taken a business card. So
I was going to say, I know you're on Instagram, but you also do events as well?
Yeah, things like Works with Festival, Melbourne Festival. Those are like the two main ones that I do. But I've just joined Peak District Artisans, and that's fantastic because there's a whole load of opportunity available there for exhibiting. So they have the Great Dome exhibition in Buxton, for example, every year. So I've exhibited there with them. And they have up and coming exhibitions at Chatsworth. So I've got a January exhibition coming up there, and along with other PDA artists. So that's been a big door opener, really.
Right. So you mentioned commissions, but I mean, can people also reach out for you for workshops?
Yeah, I do workshops on request. I've done a couple recently for a lady who has a silversmithing group, and they wanted to learn basic enamelling, so I've taught them 2 courses of basic enamelling. I prefer small numbers because I can give more individual attention to people. However, the previous 2 workshops that I've done have had 12 people.
Okay. It's interesting to see you working in a workshop alongside other artists. How did you come to be here?
I got evicted, basically. I was working, my workbench was only this bench, and I was in my husband's office, and with COVID he had to do a lot of his work from home, whereas previously he would be abroad a lot, and it just didn't really work with him trying to run a training course and me hammering away in the background. So in the end, because his work was it's become more and more a case of him needing his office space. It was unfeasible for me to actually do any jewellery at all there, so I was looking for somewhere to move to, and fortunately found here, which is great because I was very much working in isolation at home, and I have another job as well, which is home based, so I wasn't really getting out much. So it was nice. It's nice to be here in an environment where there's more people around, and you can chat, and it's a very friendly place to be.
We've chosen time for the filming when there's nobody else here, but usually it's
normally
live,
there's more people around, and everyone's just so nice.
Well, thank you, Mary, very much.
You're welcome.